Hey friends, welcome to Tech Harvesting. In today's video, we're going to have a look at how we can become a full stack web developer in 2021 or any year actually, because the technologies don't change much. We're going to have a look at what you should learn from HTML and go all to the advanced topics like cloud and DevOps. So let's get started. First, let's have a look at what a full stack web developer is and what's the job of full stack web developer. A full stack web developer is a person or a developer who develops the front end, the back end, and also deploys the application. He takes care of the infrastructure, where it should be hosted. All the stuff are done by the full stack web developer, and he should know about the coding the back end and the front end. That's very important. And even some DevOps techniques like Docker and Kubernetes, like how you can orchestrate them and put the application into a container, and also some more stuff. And we're going to cover each topic that we need to learn in depth right now. So the first thing you will need to learn if you want to become a web developer or a full stack web developer is HTML. Well, that's the basic of web development, because when we want to create a website, we should learn to use HTML, because that's the way we create websites. HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and I have a full video series on how HTML works and how you can use it. I've also showed you how you can create a small website with HTML. So HTML is what you should learn first, how it works and what you can do. You can create different tags with HTML, you can use them, and there are different concepts in HTML like the head, the title, the body. All those are things you should learn first. The next thing you should have a look at is CSS, which stands for Cascading Style Sheets, which makes our websites look better. At the beginning, if you're just using HTML, it'll look like full black and white. The links will look like a blue with an underline, and it'll not look nice, okay? So to make it look great, you'll need to learn CSS. CSS is also a technology which is used to style websites. There are also some alternatives, like there's CSS itself, but just a little bit more features on top of CSS. So we'll talk about those soon. Before that, these are the two main things you should learn first, but there are a lot of things more you should learn. These are the first two things that you should learn in this journey. The next thing you should have a look at is JavaScript. JavaScript is also a very important part in web development. When you're creating a website, first you will need to have some functionality. For example, if you click this button, you want this to happen. That's something you'll always need. You just don't want it to look just like a plain website which does nothing, just to show you some stuff, like just like a information page or something. We want it to do something, right? For example, if you click on the menu and you want to show the menu, that's all done using JavaScript. And of course, there are a lot of stuff you can do with JavaScript. This is just what the basics are. So first you'll learn HTML, then CSS, and then you'll have a look at the basics of JavaScript. This time you should also look at Git and GitHub, which are also kind of very important parts, because later when you are growing in web development and you're learning more topics, these technologies will become very useful. Git and GitHub are used for version controlling, and it helps you manage all versions. So for example, if you create a mistake in your first version of the application and you want to go back to the older version, then you can revert the changes and go back and get back the old code. So that's also one thing you'll have to learn about. I have an entire video on Git and GitHub. I'll link it down below. Next, you have to learn about a bit more advanced JavaScript topics like asynchronous JavaScript, promises, and a lot of other things also. You'll also have to learn about some other features of JavaScript which are not much popular, but they'll be very useful to you. And you can also learn about debugging with JavaScript. Most people use console logs for debugging, which is not the best way to do debugging. You have to use a debugger like VS Code debugger or something. You can also learn other concepts with that, and you can also take some certification if you want for JavaScript itself once you have learned the advanced concepts of JavaScript. Yeah, so the next thing you'll have to look at is Sass, which is optional, okay? This is just an optional thing. It is good if you learn it. You'll just have more control over making your websites look better. This is called a superset of CSS, which means it adds more features to CSS. I told before there are other alternatives. Sass is one of them. You can also have a look at Less, which is the same thing as Sass, like the syntax is different, but it does the same thing. So Sass and Less has some additional features that it adds on top of CSS. For example, it has if conditions, variables, and it has mixins, which are like functions, and all those things. You can also have your CSS in different files. So those are some things you can learn. This feature is also very recommended, but it's optional, okay? This is highly recommended because it adds a lot of features to JavaScript. This is TypeScript, which is kind of similar to JavaScript, except it adds more features on top of JavaScript. So we looked at Sass, which is a superset of CSS, but TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So it adds more features to JavaScript, and you can use TypeScript in your projects instead of JavaScript, which will add more features and it'll be more easy to debug. It'll also reduce the number of errors that you'll be getting when you use JavaScript. So if you're using JavaScript, you might get more errors, but if you use TypeScript, the errors will decrease. The next thing you have to look at is deploying your application. Once you've created an application, maybe it's a simple website, doesn't matter. You want it to be live on the internet so that everyone can access it. If this is just a HTML, CSS, JavaScript, the website, then I have a video on that where you can deploy it to a platform called Netlify, which is free and you can just go ahead and deploy. But if it's some more advanced things, you could use Netlify still, you could use Vercel, there are more options also. And you could maybe go for an advanced option like the paid ones if you're looking for a production ready application. So that's one thing you should learn. Even later after that, when you're creating more advanced applications with React and other frameworks, which I'm just going to come to in a second, you'll also need to learn deployment with those applications. The next thing you'll have to look at is learn a front-end framework. This also requires JavaScript, so of course you'll need to learn JavaScript before you learn a front-end framework. A front-end framework is like writing a HTML, CSS, and JavaScript website, but it simplifies the process and adds more features so they can get control of more advanced features of your browser. So there are actually 4 popular front-end frameworks, like there are more, but the fourth one is not as popular, but it's also very popular. The most popular one is React.js, and this was created by Facebook, and it's a very popular front-end framework. It uses JavaScript, and yeah, that's the first one. Then you have Vue.js, which is more beginner friendly, so if you're just getting started with a front-end framework, you can use Vue.js and then learn React also, which is a bonus, but React is the most popular one. And then you have Angular, which uses TypeScript and is created by Google. So TypeScript, you'll need to learn TypeScript if you want to use Angular.js. And you also have Svelte, which is kind of new and it's also much faster than the other frameworks. But the thing is that most people won't use Svelte. I don't know why, but it's less in popularity, but it's also very fast and efficient. Next, we'll need to have a look at how APIs work. APIs are also a very important part of becoming a full stack web developer, and the API is in the back end. So all the things we discussed till now were in the front end, and now we're moving onwards to the back end. So for the back end, you'll need to create an API, and there are multiple ways you can create an API. You can use a language like Python, JavaScript, Java. There are a lot of ways. You can even use Golang. So if you're using JavaScript, there are 2 options. You could just use vanilla Node.js, and if you don't know what Node.js is, it's a runtime which helps us to run JavaScript on the server side. So JavaScript is mostly used on the browsers so that we can control our browser and add some features to our websites, but you can also use it on the backend with the help of Node.js. And Express is also another way you could create a server. It's much easier than using normal Node.js, but Express uses Node.js and it runs on top of Node.js. Anyways, Express is what I recommend if you want to get started, because you'll already know JavaScript when you come to this point. The another technology you could use is Django or Flask. These are when you're using Python. So if you want to use Python for the backend of your website, you could use Django or Flask. These are also very popular frameworks. If you're using Java, you could use something like Spring Boot or Spring, and that's also a very popular choice if you're using Java. The next thing you'll have to look at is using a database. So when you're creating an application, maybe you have a big idea to create, you'll need to store everything, right? For example, if a user signs up, the next time when they log in, like there's no account, you'll need to store everything in some place. So you'll need to use a database. So there are different types of databases you can use. The 2 main types of databases are relational and non-relational. I have created a video on databases and MongoDB specifically, which is a non-relational database. And you could go ahead and watch that if you want to understand more to databases, but I'm just going to explain it like briefly. So the MongoDB is one of the most, it's also called as a document database, and Postgres is one of the SQL or the relational databases. So these 2 are the most used databases. There are also other options like MariaDB, DynamoDB, which is mostly used with AWS, and even other options also, SQLite, MS SQL. You could use, it actually depends on you which you find easier to use. And yeah, that's about databases. Now let's jump back to the front end for a second, because I want to add another feature that you could will just make your website look better and will make your website grow and add some more features on top of your current technology skills. So you can use a framework like Next.js if you're using React. So if you learn React for the front-end part, you could use Next.js, which adds some more features. For example, if you just build a React application, then you'll not have search engine optimization, which means you will not, like if you search on Google, it'll be ranked last or it'll just not show up. So if you use Next.js, it adds more features and it just come on Google or any search engine you use. And also it has some other features built in like server-side rendering. It has CSS module support, the built-in route, a lot of stuff. There are a lot of features built into Next.js. And if you're using Vue and not React, there's Nuxt.js, which sounds similar to Next.js, but it's different. So Nuxt.js is for Vue, and if you used Angular, there's actually nothing for Angular because Angular already comes with a lot of features built in. And if you're using Svelte, you can use SvelteKit, which is like the next of Svelte or the Nuxt of Svelte, whichever you used. Okay, so that's about the frameworks which run on top of your front-end framework. The next thing is optional, but I highly recommend learning GraphQL, which is like an alternative to REST APIs. So when you use REST APIs, you have different routes which serve different data, right? So if you go to /API/ maybe products, you get all the products. But that might take a lot of time to create stuff and update stuff. So the better thing to use is GraphQL, which is like just a single endpoint. So /GraphQL, and you ask in your client, in your front end, you tell the server what all you want. You send a request. It's called a GraphQL query, and the server sends back the data that you asked for. And if you want to create something, you create a mutation, which is like creating something, and you just use a normal query to get stuff from the database or the server. So GraphQL is much faster than REST APIs, and it's also a powerful alternative. Next, you'll have to learn about DevOps. Like, you don't have to go deep into all the techniques that you can use. Different technologies are there, but the main ones are like Docker. You could use Kubernetes to orchestrate your applications. If you're building a micro services application which has different parts, so you have a front end, you have a back end, you have a small service for each of these things, then you could use Kubernetes, which is highly helpful when you're using microservices. So Kubernetes just helps you to manage your containers, and containers are just like a small piece of application into a small container. It's not a virtual machine, it's much different. And that's about containers. And if you want to set up your own Kubernetes environment, I have a video on that where you can create a multi-node cluster. If that does not make sense, go ahead and watch that video. GitHub, which I mentioned before, is also a part of DevOps. GitHub, like before you just had to learn the basics, now you have to learn more advanced features of GitHub like branching, stashing, and all other advanced features. And also you can learn Jenkins, which helps in continuous integration, continuous deployment, or CI/CD pipelines. That's also a very important part. Like, it just helps you build your code. So Jenkins is a tool that helps you build your code. There are of course more tools that you can have a look at, like Prometheus, and like literally a lot of tools. I can't tell all of them now, but if you learn a lot of them, it's really going to help you. The last thing that you'll have to learn about to become a full stack web developer is cloud. So you'll need to learn AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. Like, there are a lot of options, but those three are the main ones. So you could create a lot of virtual machines, and you could create networks and all those things. You could even deploy your application without using something like Virtual Netlify directly onto a virtual machine, and you could like go ahead and use it. Or you can even host your database in the cloud. Like, there are a lot of things you can do with the cloud. There are a lot of AWS services, Microsoft Azure services, like literally a lot. There are different features that you can use. You can create different like email providers with Amazon, AWS, and you could like send messages. There are a lot of stuff you could do with different of these services on the cloud. So that was it for this video. I just wanted to tell you how you can become a full stack web developer in whatever year you're watching this at. Yeah. So thanks for watching. Make sure to like, share the video with your friends if you find this helpful, and subscribe to my channel for more amazing videos just like this. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.